ETM Hotel, Rennie Sean. Welcome in peace. My name is Sean. I'd like to thank everybody for tuning in to Kofi Pie Side Research Team. Please like the show, share the show, tell a friend, that we're actually live. If you're not subscribed, subscribe to the channel. Click the notification bell so that you will get the notification when we do go live. Make sure you support what SARS-CoV-2 taught me, which is in the description of the video, and Spill Masters, our volume 4 work, published works. Please, if you have not got your copy of what SARS-CoV-2 taught me, get that right now. You had the time, you had the money, you had the energy. Support that work. Also support the work of the Kofi Pie Side Research Team and get your copy. Pick up your copy of Spill Masters, Volume 4. Very interesting topics in that book. We introduced Brother Chavis to you in that book, and we deal with the actual scholarship on a multitude of levels. This is a survey of the African minds of warrior scholars. So please support our publications, as we don't really ask for donations or anything like that. We like to provide things for you in return. So we also have an apparel company at familyconnectapparel.com. Make sure you go get your clothing, whether it's Science with Sean, whether it's Tep Hessop, whether it's Naja Valley, whether it's Kofi Pasa Research Team, the Masi, whether it's the Mboka brand. We have clothing at familyconnectapparel.com. Please support. So as people are coming in, I'm going to ask everyone, as you are coming in, please like the show, share the show, tell a friend. Before we get going, I do want to recap what we went over yesterday. So what we did was a breakdown of the introduction to Dr. Heywood's book on Nzinga. Now, if you're unfamiliar with the doctor, she actually went to Portugal to do the primary research for her work. She looked at all the evidence from all perspectives on Queen Nzinga. That led her and influenced her to write this publication. She pulled out narratives, she pulled out some confusions, and she was not biased in her research. So we went through the introduction to set the context, to give it historical context. So we outlined it based on historical context. And for anyone that's unfamiliar with what historical context is, if you missed it, okay, I'm going to just roughly go over it again, because there are some people who may not even seen part 1 of this video. All right. So again, historical context definition. Historical context is the social, political, cultural, economic, and environmental situations that influence the events or trends we see happening during that time. Therefore, if we are unfamiliar with the traditions, culture, thinking, or events happening at the time in history, we could misinterpret or lose the meaning of a piece of writing we are reading. Effective ways to consider historical context in writing is to always ask questions. All right. What are those questions? Shout out to the person who thumbed down the video already. Well, who is the author? My bad. Who is the author? When was it written? Are there any references or languages you don't understand? Could they be specific to the time period? Were there any religious, cultural, political, or economic events happening at the time that could have influenced the writer and their piece? All right. So, again, as you're coming in, like the show, share the show, tell a friend, we are live. That's historical context at its finest. All right. Now, how did we get here? Before we get going on part 2 of the video, and we're letting people come in, and, I'm kind of, bringing things into fruition. How did we get here? It all started when someone said that Africans, and you see how general that is, which Africans? It's not specific. But Africans enslaved other Africans and sold Africans. Africans had a slave market and a slave trade before the coming of a European or an Arab. That's how we got here. Days later, well, yeah, not even days later, but Nzinga comes out as someone who was heralded as a heroic figure, yet she traded slaves. So this is how we got here. So part one was to be specific and provide historical context so that we don't ruin the legacy of a liberator in her time who is praised by her people in the Congo for what she did. I posed the question yesterday and I still haven't got an answer from anyone, but I'll ask it again and I'll continue to ask it until someone answers the question. Have you ever been in a war? Have you ever been in a situation where you invaded, or have you been invaded? And when the invasion occurred, what was the circumstances? Were you surrounded? Did you have to give up? Did you hand over your weaponry? Were you a POW, prisoner of war? Were you fighting for your people to get your people back? Were you fighting to reclaim your kingdom or your country or your nation? Have you? So we get here by the way of irresponsible conversations that were held for numerous days, and probably will be more conversations, but we just want to give it historical accuracy and historical context. But we want to also provide a methodology so that we're not making the mistakes that other people are making when we're doing what we're doing. So I appreciate everyone tuning into the Kofi Paisai research team as the legacy of Queen Nzinga part 2 is being orchestrated. And let me real briefly edit the video so we don't have anyone assuming that this is part 1. I want to make sure we got that right. Edit. Oh. So again, like the show, share the show, tell a friend to tell a friend. Get the algorithms up. Subscribe if you haven't subscribed. Let's put this thing in the best context that we can. And we're going to do what we need to do. All right. So now that I've gotten everybody pretty much caught up without generalizing the conversation and where it went, we're going to begin here in just a moment. I just need to drink something real quick so I don't be cottonmouth. It's my fast day, so nothing but juicing and water. I do want to say shout out to everybody in the chat. I do see people came into the chat. Sister Ladosha is available. She should be doing hair, but she tuned in. Pure Black, Chavez. Sister Keisha's in the chat. We got our brother Teddy. We got Trimmers. We got Bonita, Sister Bonita, Damar, Enigma, Keenan, and of course, we got Infinite Minds in the building. There's a few more people that may be watching and not saying anything, so peace to you. Thank you for tuning into the Kofi Paisai research team. It is, a pleasure to be able to grace your presence today, and I appreciate everybody following up with the bill. So I'm pretty sure as the bill continues to develop and the algorithms pop up or people's notifications ring out or whatever the case may be, more people are joining in on the panel. So hopefully those people, you know what I mean, to tune in, hit the like button and share the show. Peace, brother Dave B. Peace, sister Tika. I see you guys are in the building. Welcome, welcome, welcome. And let me do one thing here, and then we can get it going. All right. So now that we're all caught up, Nzinga, born in 1582, was the descendant of a royal line reaching back to the founding of the kingdom of Ndongo. Her predecessors consolidated Ndongo as a powerful force in Central Africa and contended with the arrival of the Portuguese mission in 1560 and subsequent military force in 1575. They would establish strong ruling traditions that she would later maintain, while at the same time facing a daunting challenge from abroad that she would struggle with in turn. The founder and first historical king of Ndongo, Angola, Kaluje Kiasamba, who reigned between 1515 and 1556, took power only a few decades before Nzinga's birth. Ngolo Kiasambe was a peaceful consensus maker, but a complex mix of political intrigues and wars had precipitated his rise and rule. He set the stage for the dynasty's dominance by restoring a fractured kingdom, one that had witnessed the murder of his son by a jealous uncle against whom he and his wife had wreaked vengeance. According to traditions, Angola, Kiasambe began his rule sometime before 1515. He consolidated power in Ndongo by maintaining internal peace while significantly expanding the country's borders by conquering many neighbor states. In 1518, seeking to enhance his power and compete with the more powerful Congo kingdom, Angola Kiasambe sent two ambassadors to Portugal seeking trade and a broader control relations, but a return mission from Portugal in 1520 had no lasting impact. His successors maintained the model he established, subjecting small independent provinces in Ndongo's overlordship while continuing to form diplomatic alliances with neighboring states as well as with the Portuguese. The kings who followed Angola Kiasambe were expert military leaders and state builders, although according to oral history, political cohesion was undermined during the short, brutal reign of the successor of Ndambi A. Angola, who reigned between 1556 and 1561. Now, Ndambi Angola is said to have ascended to the throne after murdering all but two of his siblings. The surviving pair only narrowly escaped the same fate by fleeing to a neighboring kingdom. Ndambi Angola held on to the throne through terror and intimidation, and according to the Capuchin missionary Giovanni Antonio Cavazzi, when he died, he was honored with the sacrifice of innumerable human victims. Later rulers, including Nzinga, considered this custom of human sacrifice an essential part of the burial rituals, honoring Ndongo rulers and other members of the elite. Detailed historical accounts and oral traditions of Ndongo began the rule of Angola Kialanje Kia Ndambi, who took power after Ndambi Angola's death. A century after his death, elderly members of Mbundu elite and their Portuguese contemporaries still regard Capuchin missionaries with their tales of impressive military feats, which resulted in all the provinces along the Dande, Zenza, and the Lukala rivers all the way up to Luanda being brought under Ndongo's control. His legacy was long-lasting. During the 1560s, the Portuguese fort of Maxuma on the lower Kwanza River was called Nsandera in honor of Izande tree. The Angola Kialujin was said to have planted there to mark his military conquest in the region. Angola and Ndambi began his reign in 1561 after his father's death and shortly after the arrival of the first official mission from Portugal in 1560. The mission was headed by Captain Paula Diaz and Noves, who would play an important role in the later military conquest of Ndongo. Reports by members of his delegation provided us with a vivid picture of the kingdom just before the conquest, during the transition of Ndambi Angola to rule that of Angola Kilanji. Knowledge that the kings of their powerful neighbor Congo had opened their lands to strangers from across the waters had motivated the rulers of Ndongo to send their own emissaries to Portugal to request missionaries starting in 1518 and continuing through 1556. When Angola Kiasamba sent representatives to Lisbon. Remember, Lisbon's a slave port. They were conducting the trade of slaves at Lisbon. They were coming off the ships. They were leaving Lisbon and they were arriving back in Lisbon. And then they had a slave market right off the docks. So soon as the slaves or the captives, soon as they got off the boats, they were in a marketplace for people to purchase them. Lisbon. Think about that. Let that marinate for a second. Now, a mission was finally dispatched to Ndongo on December 22nd, 1559. The Portuguese who left Lisbon on that day had instructions from the regent Dona Catarina, who was reigning on behalf of the grandson Sebastio, to travel to Ndongo to begin missionary work there. The delegations, which included 4 Jesuit missionaries, stopped at Sao Tome to pick up the Portuguese experts with local knowledge of Ndongo and arrived at the outlet of the Kwanzaa River on the 3rd of May in 1560. 2 of Mbundu, members of the party who had traveled to Portugal with the original missionaries, were immediately sent to the interior to alert the Ndongo king of the party's arrival. According to Antonio Mendez, one of the Jesuits of the group, they waited for 4 months moored in the bay before officials arrived to grant them permission to make the long trip to the capital. So these Portugal missionaries arrived at the bay. They were kept there for 4 months before getting approval to come into the land. I wonder why that is. The wait was grueling, and Ndongo was in the grip of a severe drought. The heat was intense, and disease-carrying mosquitoes abounded. Food and water supplies were also low. 10 members of the group, including one of the priests, died. The survivors were saved only when the local ruler of the region supplied the group with cattle, goats, and local produce. With the arrival of the king's emissary at the head of the military party, Diaz Novis and the remaining of the party could begin a journey that would take them up the Kwanzaa River and then overland to Kabasa, Ndongo's capital. Leaving their large caravel, they transferred their supplies onto longboats and canoes. They traveled 100 miles up Kwanzaa River until they reached a point where rapids and islands prevented further travel upstream. The local official in the change of the port at this point in the river attended to their needs. For the next 4 months, they traveled on land to Kabasa. That's 8 months of traveling. During the trip, the group moved from one territory to another, and each territory leader made sure the travelers were fed, housed, and protected, as was his duty. When the party finally reached Kabasa, the king had 3 cottages prepared for the visitors in his own compound. Some 5 days after arriving in Kabasa, the Portuguese were allowed to enter the king's quarters, situated in well-watered area of the city and protected by large palm trees. One of the first things that stood out to the Portuguese was the intricate security they had to go through before reaching the king's residence, which sported a large patio and was surrounded by massive painted columns. One of the Jesuit priests, Father Mendez, was impressed by what he saw and the king's appearance. Ndambi Angola, who was in the final year of his reign, he was the priest that wrote, "One of the tallest in the land, like a giant and very strong." Ndambi Angola was most likely dressed in the attire and adornments that would become the official regalia of Ndongo royalty in the years to come. A red feathered, most likely peacock, in his hair, a red cloth covering his chest and shoulder, and a cloth made of sheepskin with black and white spots covering him from the waist down. His body would have been splashed with powder, signifying the spiritual and military esteem that he had attained as a result of his prowess on the battlefield. His impressive physical appearance reflected the tremendous power. At the time he was meeting the Portuguese, and Ndambi Angola was said to have controlled 500 principalities whose leaders paid him tribute and led squadrons on their own subordinates in the many wars that he fought. Nearly 1,000 dependents attended him in the capital city, a number that skyrocketed to nearly 30,000 during public festivals. According to Portuguese missionaries, Ndambi Angola was regarded as divine by his subjects. He had himself worshipped the god and openly boasted that he was the Lord of the rain. From his majestic seat made of palms, Ndambi Angola listened to the Portuguese missionaries' explanation of the tenets of the Christian faith that they had hoped he and his people would adopt. Although suspicious of their motives, he ultimately gave a group of permission to begin their missionary work in Cabasa and selected 15 to 20 of his own children and those of his leader advisors to be the foreigners' first students. The arrival of the Portuguese, with their religious and political plans, created a dilemma in the rulers of Ndongo. The Jesuit missionaries practiced a religion that had the potential to undermine the spiritual and legal power of the king and the advisors. Furthermore, the political relations Dias Noves indicated his monarch in Portugal saw with Ndongo could potentially diminish the powerful political position the king held in relation to the provincial and territorial leaders, as well as the rulers of surrounding states, such as Congo and Mataba. Added to this was the threat the newcomers posed to the entire social fabric of Ndongo. Before the Portuguese arrived, the Ndongo was unquestionably the most powerful person in the state, held by the payment of tribute from less powerful but autonomous political entities. These payments were enforced by the Ndongo's army. The Portuguese brought not only guns, but also different cultural values regarding spirituality, justice, notions of social status and inheriting status with rights to rule, freedom and slavery, serfdom and captivity, hospitality, trade, and the like. Thus, although Ndambi Angola allowed the Portuguese visitors to remain in Cabasa and even permitted the Jesuits to open a school, this welcome did not last. When he died sometime in 1561 and his sons Gola and Ndambi took power in Ndongo, the situation changed. Ngola Kilanje turned against the Portuguese, his son, okay? He turns against the Portuguese, convinced the real motives of the group were to spy on his land. He imprisoned Dias Noves and several other members of the delegation, along with some local Mbandus who had assisted the Portuguese, and expelled the rest of the delegation, sending back to the coast under a military escort. Ngola Kilanje eventually released one of the priests, and later in 1565, Dias Noves was released. Only one of the priests, Father Francisco de Gouveia, stayed behind in Cabasa, where he died 10 years later. Although Ngola Kilanje had let Dias Noves go, he held some members of the Portuguese delegation hostage in the capital for 5 years, a decision that had as much to do with statecraft as with suspicions about Portuguese motives. A captain in Dias Noves' second expedition later contended that Ngola Kilanje and Dias Noves had worked out an arrangement whereby Dias Noves would return to Lisbon to use an alleged hostage situation as a ploy for raising arms for the Angola, who was threatened by the uprising of a powerful provincial noble. In return, Dias Noves' military help, Ngola Kilanje may have promised to sign a commercial treaty with the Portuguese. Angola, Kilanje made strategic use of power in internal affairs as well as external affairs. He maintained his subordinates' allegiance, for example, by keeping women, young women of the leading families as hostages in the district where the principal wife, secondary wives, and concubines lived. In 1564, he moved the headquarters to a city called Angola, not far from the capital of Kabasa, where he lived with his principal wife, Kwaladumbua, more than 400 concubines, and at least 70 children. He wielded his power deftly, yet he was also remembered as a kind and just king. According to the Jesuits, even his enemies submitted to him without resistance. Father Gauvet noted that the court proceedings were orderly and open to the public. Although he admired the king's transparency, the Catholic priest was appalled by some of his heathen customs, such as dispensing justice in court by means of death sentences. The next ruler of this powerful kingdom was Nzinga's grandfather, Angola Kasenda. Kasenda began his rule with several political disadvantages, not the least of which was a relative weak claim to the kingdom. He was not a direct descendant of Angola Samba, the founder of Ndongo, but rather a descendant from a different lineage. Kasenda was his partisans in Kabasa had triumphed in a bloody cup, but were not interested in changing the direction of the country. I said cup, I meant co-op, sorry. During his reign, Kasenda took up arms against his enemies. Some were intimidated and forced back into the fold, while others were alienated and never forgave him or his descendants. He also conquered additional provinces such that the number of territorial rulers subject to Ndongo reached 2,000 by 1586. Ndongo covered so much territory that one European observer at the time mistook the three largest provinces for a kingdom in their own right. I'm going to pause right there to let you know that we're setting the stage up for Nzinga. All right. We have this list of this lineage of kings. None of them are women. Before her grandfather, there was a tyrant in control, but he was more so concerned with running out the Portuguese in a plot to gain arms. So his strategy was to hold them captive against their will, fake like they're being ambushed or held against their will, send Diaz back to Portugal, where he would come up with a story for the military and so forth to get arms so that people can arm and protect themselves against some particular tyrant. But ultimately, it was to get his people the arms to help them control. Then her grandfather takes the throne. Her grandfather comes from a different lineage line. He is not of the line of Samba. He basically, there's some type of usurp that takes place, because if he's not in the lineage line, he has to usurp in order to gain kinship. But we don't have the actual historical record to confirm how he comes into kinship. Therefore, we know that her grandfather is now the king. Now a new line is created. Remember, before we move forward, I want you to remember that the Portuguese are under the impression that Diaz and them were held against their will. They were enslaved and made captive. And this rumor gets back to Portugal. And now it's some type of military issue. But they don't get to Portugal. I mean, they don't get back from Portugal, the military and all that, and Diaz and all of them, until sometime later. So it takes time for them to get there. By the time they get there, there's a new king, her grandfather, who has no idea what's in store for him, but he's in the presence. Now that we know what's going on, we can move forward. Although Cassinda expanded the boundaries of Ndongo and gained power over several regions, the start of his reign coincided with the return of the Portuguese and a protracted military, economic, and spiritual crisis that culminated decades later in the defiant campaigns of Queen Nzinga in the 1600s. They're going to call this the Portuguese invasion of Ndongo. See, the Portuguese had been strengthening their relationship with Congo between 1565 and 1575, and by 1574, the King of Congo had given them permission to build a small settlement on the island of Luanda, which Congo claimed. The first thing the Portuguese did was build a temporary church on the island. In 1575, a small group of Portuguese in Luanda welcomed back Paulo Dias Noves, who had headed the first Portuguese mission to Ndongo in 1560. This time, he brought with him a significant military and civilian force. Thus began the Portuguese military conquest of lands that Ndongo had long claimed. And Angola, Kalange had suspected the real intent of the Portuguese was to conquer Ndongo and integrate it into the Portuguese Empire. The Jesuit missionaries sustained the conquest, giving their blessings to the Portuguese military and civilian actions. Dias Novas had left Lisbon on October the 23rd of 1574, bearing the weighty title of first governor and Capitão Mor de Conquista do Reino del Angola, which was captain general of the conquered kingdom of Angola, and commanded an armada of 9 ships, 700 men, much artillery, and 4 priests. His directions from the King of Portugal were to subject and conquer the kingdom of Angola. The fleet arrived in the port of Luanda on the 20th of February in 1575. After he was alerted to the arrival of the Portuguese, Cassinda wasted no time in contacting them. On the 29th of June, one of his officials arrived in Luanda with delegations and delivered a message from the king to the church that the Portuguese had constructed. Cassinda offered the Portuguese slaves provisions, livestock, and other goods. In return, Dias Novas offered Cassinda presents from King Sebastião of Portugal. Cassinda and Dias Novas subsequently joined forces on campaigns against recalcitrant provincial leaders, and Dias de Novas' men were given free access to Ndongo's market. Following a short period of cooperation, however, relations deteriorated after Cassinda convinced the Portuguese were intent on conquering his kingdom, arrested and killed 40 Portuguese in Cabasa, confiscating their merchandise and many slaves. Cassinda's suspicions were well founded. Dias de Novas had been conducting his own military campaigns in his region, conquering more than 70 leagues, about 200 miles, of Ndongo territory and subordinating many of Cassinda's tribute-paying vassals. By March of 1582, the year of Nzinga's birth, Dias Novas had informed King Sebastião of his conquest of 70 knights, so powerful that each of them can resist all the power of the king of Angola. Throughout the 1580s, the Portuguese and their African allies made significant gains in many parts of the kingdom. The first interior fort was established at Masiango, at the confluence of the Lucala on the Kwanzaa River in 1582. Father Baltasar Alfonso, one of the 4 priests in Dias Novas' delegation, boasted to the king of Portuguese about their success. He says in his writings to the King Sebastião in October 1582 to request additional material and men for Dias Novas' campaign. He noted that with just 100 men, the governor had taken half the kingdom of Angola, subordinating many grand lords, and in 3 months he has won 3 wars against the king of Angola, killing and capturing infinite numbers of people. Although we do not have independent confirmation of casualties from Ndongo sources, Portuguese records are replete with the descriptions of the devastating human and physical cost of their early campaigns against Cassinda. In 1583 campaign alone, Cassinda was supposed to have lost 40,000 men, while Portuguese losses numbered a mere 7. In another battle, the Portuguese forces were said to have come so close to the capital that after they fired only 2 shots, the king, without waiting, took off and fled with his people. The infant Nzinga would have been among that group that fled. So at her birth, her grandfather is fighting the Portuguese behind something another king started before him. The intent was to gain access to guns for one under a plot, but Noves Diaz had a different agenda as he was governing and came back with his own military. When he came back with his own military, he had intentions on expanding the Portugal provinces himself. He wanted to make room for his own stuff, set his own agenda up, claim his own land, conquer and invade as many square miles as he wanted so that he can look good to the people back in Portugal when he returned. He's establishing himself. And Nzinga is just a baby. So I want everybody to now you have an idea of what she was born into as a child. She knows nothing yet. But there is chaos in the Congo among the Ndongo specifically. The Portuguese have expanded. They're now ruling places that they didn't have before. And Diaz isn't done. The continuing advances of the Portuguese and the loss of some of his vassals forced Casinda and members of the court to flee from Cabasa again 2 years later. During the flight, Casinda made several temporary forts, each one of a day's journey from the one before it, to avoid capture by the Portuguese and their African allies in pursuit. In 1585, at the Battle of Taladongo in the province of Masiki, just a 4-day journey from Cabasa, Casinda sent a large army, the flower of Angola, to face the Portuguese, but it proved no match for the enemy. At the end of the fighting, the Portuguese forces admired the battlefield where only severe heads were visible, as men fled to save what? Their lives. Among the dead were many of Casinda's high-ranking military officials. Other high officials and relatives of Casinda were captured alive. Casinda faced an even more disastrous loss in 1586 when all but 20 of 700 Ndongo troops drowned as they attempt to cross the Lukala River. Many of Ndongo's neighboring regions and subordinate territories experienced destruction, brutality, and humiliation at the hands of the Portuguese. In 1581, an operation near the salt-rich province of Cacema, 150 Portuguese soldiers stormed the lands of the local lord to avenge the death of their comrades. They seized 100 slaves and burned the villages. A missionary witness observed that with provisions they took or destroyed among the livestock, oil, honey, and also a house full of salt, the main export of the province, were so abundant that one can fill 2 slave ships with them. In another campaign, a provincial lord who had been captured offered the Portuguese 100 slaves as ransom. The Portuguese accepted the slaves and went ahead and decapitated the lord in the public square anyway. I'm going to run that back for y'all in case you missed it. Turmoil, losing ground. The Portuguese is expanding. Diaz, military campaign pot against the Ndongo king of Angola, and he's manipulating people. He's even got allies. They're wrecking shop. They're doing whatever they wanted to do. People are running and fleeing. Lords are being captured. His own family being captured. His military being captured. And the lords, they get captured. And as a ransom, they say, well, I can give you these people for their own safety. Let me stop right there. Before the slave trade began, the transatlantic slave trade began, there was an incident where Europeans, Portuguese, had ventured into the tip of West Africa. It's the first time that they actually got down there. They come down there, right? They get to a shore. They're unfamiliar with the territory, so they dock the boat. They're walking. It's about 10 of them or whatever. I don't know specifically. But there was a man wandering in the land. At the time, they didn't know this man was a prominent player in a position, but it didn't matter to them. To them, they saw somebody. They didn't recognize him. They didn't look familiar to them. They captured the man, took him back to their land. When they take him back to their land, this dude says, "Well, I can get you 10 people for just me." Some of y'all gonna say, Adahu the Moor. It ain't in the chat yet, but some of y'all gonna think about the story of Adahu the Moor. I'm gonna let y'all put that part together. But this would lead to a bigger issue. So these lords that were prominent in this kingdom, for their own ransom, would give up other people. During these operations, the Portuguese began the gruesome practice of cutting off the noses of people they killed in the wars and sending them back to the Portuguese camps as trophies. In one engagement, 619 noses was cut off from fallen Ndongo soldiers. In another, so many Ndongo soldiers was killed that the Portuguese employed 20 porters to carry all their severed noses to their headquarters. On another occasion, the Portuguese forces killed so many people that soldiers were reported to have nowhere to walk but on top of bodies. She's just a little girl at this point, merely 2 years old. Her family's fleeing from their kingdom. They're running out of spaces or places to go. The Portuguese are expanding in the Congo. And now they are humiliating the dead. The campaigns against Ndongo were not only wars of conquest, but also slave raiding operations. So as a child, she don't know what she's seeing yet, but in her childhood, people are raiding her people. They are killing and capturing her people. Her people are being sold. Their conquests are taking place. Thousands of non-combatant Mbandus were enslaved and sent to work on plantations being developed outside Luanda, or as had been happening elsewhere in Africa for some 70 years by this time. They were sold across the Atlantic to the Americas. Between 1575 and 1590s, the Portuguese exported as many as 50,000 Mbandus to Brazil as a result of their wars, enslaving trading operations against Ndongo. Historical context. She's just a baby. But the Ndongo are being enslaved, beheaded, benosed, decapitated, whatever, captured, sold. It don't matter. It's happening to them. And she's just a baby. Her kingdom is weakened. They don't really have a kingdom. She's left. By the time she gets aware of anything, she begins to know. She don't know nothing at this point. But what I'm telling you is all this is transpiring in her childhood. The decapitating, the mutilating, the disrespect of the dead, the slave raiding, the Portuguese manipulation. Nobody talks about the manipulation of the Europeans in Africa and how they intervened and intertwined things. All of that is left out of the conversation. Despite all the setbacks Cassandra faced, her grandfather, The formidable armies he fielded fought bravely against the Portuguese, and they did have some success. In 1581, he confronted an army composed of a small 120-man Portuguese force fighting alongside large numbers of Congolese soldiers. Cassinda's army prevailed, and the retreating Congo army reportedly left thousands of their wounded and dead on the field. Cassinda and his partisans regularly attacked provincial lords who had allied themselves with the Portuguese. In 1582, for example, Cassinda's army invades the land of Popo and Angola, who had become a vassal of the Portuguese. The next year, Cassinda assembled a major army that Portuguese eyewitnesses at the time estimate to have been hundreds of thousands. And Ndongo forces organized into 3 large squadrons and commanded by leading nobles were so large that they spread over miles. Provincial lords who had turned against Cassinda sometimes reversed course when they calculated that their own security rested more with Ndongo than with the foreigners. This happened during the 1581 battle against the combined Portuguese-Congo forces when some lords who had already joined the Portuguese side grew so suspicious of the Portuguese that they declined to help them. A few years later, a great number of lords rose up against Diaz Nova's forces, and on occasion, provincial lords and their people went so far to pretend to surrender, but then turn on the Portuguese forces when the opportunity arose. In 1588, a few of Cassinda's closest allies convinced Diaz Novas that they would help him capture Cabasa, but they then led his troops into an ambush. The following year, the Portuguese executed some Ndongo allies after discovering a plot that they had hatched to betray them. Cassinda's military skills and diplomatic expertise allowed him to assemble a pan-Central African military confederation that handled the Portuguese a major defeat at the Battle of Lucala in 1589 and 1590. In this campaign, which included troops from the kingdoms of Mataba and Congo, the alliances first assaulted the Portuguese fort at Masangano and moved the fighting up to the port of Luanda. Luis Serrero, who had taken some control of the Portuguese forces Diaz Nova's death, saw his forces defeated when 20 or 30 provincial lords had formerly been allies turned against him. He had to make a quick escape. A new governor, Francisco Almeida, arrived in Luanda in 1592 with 400 white soldiers and 50 African horsemen, with the order to expand the conquest and bring the mines under our complete dominion. He raised additional forces and started on a campaign, but the outbreak of an epidemic forced him to return to the city. Oh, wow, Mother Nature has struck again. In 1592, there was an epidemic, an outbreak that they had to retreat. Almeida abandoned the colony in 1593, leaving his brother in charge. But Cassinda was not able to maintain Ndongo's integrity despite some impressive victories. By the time of his death, 1592, he had already lost control of the Makados and the Sobos. So in the view of the local leaders, Diaz Novas and the Portuguese were no worse than Ndongo rulers in Cabasa. Since both required them to send tribute and provide men for military service, some of these leaders claimed descent from royal lineages and questioned Casaba's legitimacy. Others seized the opportunity of chaos of war to seize sending tribute or military troops support, thus depriving Cassinda of valuable resources. See, the kinship comes back into play now. The case of Sabo Maxima Contembo illustrates particularly well the situation Cassinda found himself in. In 1581, Maxima offered aid to the Portuguese if they would assist him in subjugating one of his enemies. Who was one of his enemies, y'all? Promising that he and the company of all his vassals would help Diaz Novas against the king of Angola, Cassinda. So this Angolan guy goes to the Portuguese for help, particularly Novas, saying, hey, look, we got questions about this dude being a legitimate king. So in order to help me, I'm gonna help you. But I need your help and you helping me usurp this guy. He became a vassal of the Portuguese and sent an army, a lot of provisions, pigs, and cattle. The Soba Bensing likewise switched his alliances from Kasenga to the Portuguese. So now everybody turning on Kasenga, bringing with him other members of his lineage, including his brother's son and his son-in-law. Notable among those who became allies of the Portuguese were individuals of the Hari lineage, who laid claim to the throne because they were descendants of one of the concubines of Angola Samba, the founder of Ndongo. The tributary state system of Casinda had inherited from his predecessors began its slow demise during his reign. In the past, provincial leaders had faced the threat of conquest from within. After defeat by the Ndongo king, the Sobas would not be removed from their land, but instead would be forced to send tribute to Kabasa, as well as contingents of soldiers when needed. Even when the Ndongo kings chose to remove the vanquished Sabas from their land, installing their sons in their place, these new rulers were expected to send regular tribute. Failure to do so would result in the disobedient leader's removal by the army. The enemy was now an external one. The system that the Portuguese established both in conquered lands and in the lands of Sabos, who voluntarily pledged their loyalty to the colonial power, rested on ownership of lands, goods, and people by the Jesuits and the Portuguese soldiers and merchants. In 1581, for example, Diaz Noves gave Father Basalto Barrera, head of the Jesuit community, lands that included the freed slaves, rents, and lands that had belonged to 8 powerful lords in the region of Lucala, Zinza, and Quaza rivers, as well as much of the lands and lakes the kings of Angola gave Francisco Gover, and anything else that he might have possessed and which belongs to him. Other distributions followed the conquest advance. In 1587, Diaz Noves gave the lands of powerful Sobo Masuco province of the Portuguese colonies. At this point, Portuguese goals were clear: conquer Ndongo and give the land to the Portuguese religious orders and settlers. I'm going to pause for a moment, and I want to bring the doctor in on this and give her about 10 minutes. And let's continue where we left off yesterday. So, just to jog everybody's memory, complete turmoil had existed at this time. Kasinda, which is Nzinga's grandfather, had been ruling. But something that transpired before him led to a military campaign of Diaz in the area, who is now a ruling governor, and his military comes in expanding his presence. He's taking over areas. He's doing illegitimate things that he didn't do when he was in among the Ndongo or in the Congo at all. And now he's doing this. Now he's taking over these places. He's got allies. They're slave raiding. They're killing. They're decapitating. They're cutting noses off. They're disrespecting. They got the kingdom on the run. All of this is transpiring while Queen Nzinga is just a baby. We'll come back.
She didn't give up her religion. She didn't give up her political independence when she went and negotiated with the Portuguese. The Portuguese, on the other hand, are thinking that, in fact, Njinga would become an ally, as some of the Africans who had converted would become. We know exactly where Njinga was baptized, because that's the mother church on this. So there's a lot of interesting, relevant documentation and visuals that we can bring to bear on Njinga's life. There's also this idea that, because I'm thinking about women, I just want to kind of contextualize how we should begin looking at gender in the context of Njinga's life and the implications of this for women and leadership and power in the contemporary. So I want to bring these ideas to you. If you read Thornton Belvin, Theory of the Leisure Class, and this is an old book, but it still is an edition, and he is writing in 1899, for the modern man, the patriarchal relation of status is by no means the dominant feature of life. So men don't have to think about patriarchy. But for the woman, and especially for upper class women, confined as they are by prescription, right? That's by custom, and by economic circumstances. They can't own land, they can't do this. So, the domestic sphere, their relation is the most real and most formative factor in their life. So women have a very different, this is the 19th century. And we can say today that has changed in Jinga's time. Jinga is from a matrilineal system where she has in her history women who in fact take decisions when men are either not there or have not carried out their duties. Okay, so Jinga is not coming from a European world, but the Portuguese are looking at Jinga through European eyes. Powerful women provoke anxieties in men. Among the emasculations men fear most is subordinate spirit to women. And I'm saying I could put these words back to the Portuguese and show you that it's exactly that. They could not figure out this woman. The king of Congo had in fact accepted Christianity. He was an ally. Sometimes they fought him, but she would not. She strategically decides what she wants from the Europeans. A study of several hundred people found that women who deviated from traditional gender roles by occupying a man's job or having a masculine personality were disproportionately targeted for sexual abuse. Okay? Now, in Jinga's world, we have, in fact, the Portuguese writing about she is not conforming to her gender. She should not be doing this. Women do not inherit the crown. So they are placing on Jinga ideas of patriarchy, of male superiority. And I'm not saying that males don't make good leaders. I think they do. But whenever a woman tries to make decisions, central decisions of leadership, we have all these ideas of different language being used. And I show you this when we come to the end. Female leaders are less likely to be accepted as legitimate. And there's a whole scholarship on Njinga about legitimacy. The first two articles that were written by Thornton and Joe Miller were on Njinga's legitimacy, whether she was legitimate or not. Okay? So what I try to do in this lecture is to sort of take some of these issues and let's see how it comes out, how they come out in the context of the time. Okay, this is 1624. This is from the governor, de Souza, right, to the king in Portugal, 1624. He had just become governor not too long ago. Determined to confront Anna, that's Anna Jinga, her Christian name was Anna de Souza. She take the governor's last name. I ordered that the fortress of Mbaka, that's the one that Jinga had gone and negotiated to remove the fortress, to be fortified with people and munitions with both companies. And I advised all the surrounding leaders, sobers is the term for chiefs, not to have any relations with her. And because she was what? A usurper. He is delegitimizing Jinga. She's a usurper who you have to commit patricide, matricide, all the things women are always killing if they get into power. He killed her nephew, son of the king, her brother. And with him dead, she made herself tyrannically the lady of the kingdom, which does not in any way belong to her. Now, the governor doesn't talk to the electors, to say, who are you choosing? What he's trying to do is, in fact, select some of the competitors who are looking to this to get into power, to ally with the Portuguese, so that Njinga would not take over the kingdom when her brother passes. Here's Njinga.
Now, I don't want to make these too long, so I want to keep these but they're digestible. But I want to get back to a point here. I'm doing this like this, right? Because she's the primary researcher on the history that we have on Queen Nzinga. And I'm letting her talk about Queen Nzinga while I'm providing historical context regarding this whole mess that some people sitting in the chair at a barbershop created to play psychology on, psychological games on people. But I want to wrap up what is transpiring in the Congo with Diaz on the move and Kacinda having to run and move his family and what kingdom he has left around to defend themselves from the Portuguese. Things now change to a religious conquest. The religious penetration and spiritual advances of the Portuguese were an influential in undermining Kacinda's authority, as were the military conquests. When Dias Noves arrived in Luanda in 1575, he was fully prepared to deploy the religious weapons the King of Portugal had armed him with. His group disembarked in Luanda with the pomp and pageantry. Alongside the hundreds of Portuguese soldiers were 4 Jesuits who carried reliquaries dedicated to the legendary 11,000 martyred virgins of Saint Oser. One of the priests carried the reliquaries below an ornament canopy, while the rest of the party sang hymns accompanied by a chorus of trumpets. By the end of Kacinda's reign, 26 Jesuit missionaries had arrived to join Portuguese forces. So now they're moving with a military, a choir, and some preachers. Dias Noves made no decision without first consulting the Jesuits. In 1575, for instance, he delayed meeting with Kacinda's ambassadors until he had time to pray in a small church with his soldiers and had built. Now, during the meeting, notice, Dias Noves is moving around with soldiers. His soldiers are working for him. They're fighting the war and building him churches. Nothing is said about Noves Diaz's people, who he's using to do these things. This is totally ignored. He is slaughtering Africans. He is decapitating them, cutting their noses off and sending them back to Portugal as trophies. I think there is an image out there that exists that they have a photo of a man sitting in front of a wall full of African heads that had been decapitated. Dias Noves believed that to win a battle, soldiers had to be armed with the sacrament of confessions and communion, and had to perform religious exhortations. Soldiers were to engage to come to the church 5 times to do devotions. Before doing the campaign, and to priests who accompanied the party said masses for them and Latinies. Peep this. Dias Noves and his followers attributed their military success to the guidance of the Virgin, Our Lady. Although they clearly carried the Catholic faith in their hearts, Dias Noves and his men had the goals on their mind as well, determined to complete not only the military conquest of Ndongo, but also the religious conversion to Catholic Christianity. Dias Noves made sure that all the religious rituals were performed in public as a way to attract the local population. His first targets were the Ndongo elite, followed by the Ndongo wizards, priests, and children. Early on that campaign, Diaz Novas and the missionaries made significant headway among crucial elements of the religious leadership. In an elaborate ceremony in Luando in early 1581, Father Barua baptized one of Cassenda's sons-in-laws. A powerful nobleman in Diaz Novas served as his godfather. The nobleman, dressed in opulent Portuguese regalia, adopted Diaz Novas' first name as their own, calling himself Dom Pablo. Dom Paulo. Now, Diaz Novas accorded to him yet another honor, allowing him to sit on a chair covered with a rug whenever they met. There was no question that Dom Paulo was won over. 6 months after his conversion, Dom Paulo, now allied with the Portuguese, headed an army of 5,000 to 6,000 of his own troops and to put down an uprising of the Kambambe. 1 year later, he once again went into battle against Ndongo forces. He and his men attributed their victory to against Cassinda to the apocalyptic appearance of the cross in the sky during the battle. The Portuguese referred to the battle as the War of the Sky and of God and called it Our Lady of Victory in honor of the Virgin Mary. Diaz uses Dom Pablo and others to recruit young children, men, and of course, other people, well, and people's wives, I should say. They would baptize them, they would convert them, they would do all kinds of things to them in the presence. All of this was done in the presence, literally, of people. They had prohibitions against polygamy, so people had to drop that. In 1586, the Jesuit priest Diego de Castro calculated that he had baptized no fewer than 100 provincial nobles at their own request. He speculated that these nobles were eager to secure an alliance with the Portuguese because of the cruelty of the king of Ndongo. The number of Mbandus who were baptized grew steadily, increasing from little more than 1,000 in 1584 to 20,000 in 1590. This sounds like, who does this sound like? If somebody's fighting to free you, but you're steady more clinging on to the master, and I could have rescued more had they not known that they were more than slaves. What African American leader you know went to go reclaim her people and free her people during the abolitionary movement, and she said she could have rescued more? So Cassinda's now the enemy in the eyes of his own people. The Jesuits concentrated much more of their effort on weakening the people's faith in Gangas. So all of this was about conversion, forgetting the past, getting rid of your gods, moving you forward, killing you. If you didn't get down, you was gonna lay down. It was Catholic Christianity or the gun. The spiritual war had begun. Despite the many attempts the Jesuits made to undermine the Ngangas, their numbers may actually have increased during Cassinda's reign. Certainly, there is much evidence that traditional religious beliefs continue to have a stronghold on the population, as they had done since long before the arrival of the Portuguese. For example, people continue to follow the teachings of the Ngangas by wearing ritually cleansed copper and iron rings on their arms and legs, as Nzinga would later do, in the belief that they protected them from the illnesses. Major religious practitioners served in the courts and provincial capitals were believed to have the ability to contact deceased rulers who were reputedly possessed of the priests and speak through them during times of political crisis. In 1586, a captured Ndongo noble excused his people lost of the important province of Lumbaba with the tales of such vision. He claimed that the troops had fled the Portuguese in terror because of a woman much of authority that they saw in the sky, accompanied by an old man with a sword of the fire in his hand. Veneration of dead warriors were also a core element in Ndongo religious practice. Victorious soldiers had tombs made from the skulls and the skulls of fallen comrades at the site of the battles. Human sacrifice may also have increased during Cassinda's reign. For when he died in 1592, a number of people were killed and buried with him. Throughout his reign, Cassinda promoted Ndongo religious traditions and rituals, perhaps as a counterweight to the factions at the court who had come attached to Christianity and the Portuguese. This might explain why he sent his chief religious representatives rather than his Tandala to oversee the visit of Diaz Noves and the Jesuits in 1575. As his suspicions about the motives of the Portuguese grew, Cassinda did not hesitate to move against both African and European Christians in his court. In 1580, when he gave the order to kill 40 Portuguese in Cabaça, he also gave approval for the murder of thousands of Christian Ndongo slaves who were in Cabaça trading on behalf of the Portuguese. So these people were slaves, but they was in the market area trading. Okay. The situation of Ngangas and other religious practitioners was adoxical. Despite the assault on them, Ndongo leadership, even members had become allies of the Portuguese, placed great faith in the efficacy of the traditional priests and in the rituals they oversaw and advice they gave. In one case, in 1581, a provincial lord who had come and allied the Portuguese and who had planned to assassinate Cassinda called on his religious practitioners for protection against the crossings of the river by a meeting with Diaz Noves. In 1588, Kufaxi Mambara, another Ndongo lord who initially was an ally of Portuguese, blamed his military losses on the fact that it had not rained. To improve his chances, he called on the priests called Gangas throughout his lands to conduct the necessary ceremonies. Rituals that the Ngangas and other spiritual leaders performed were considered vital to success in wars and other important events. No king or provincial ruler undertook any major public event without including religious practitioners in their entourage. Religious practitioners were also present at religious ceremonies held every 5 days following the death of a provincial ruler, where personal attendants might be buried with their masters. From the beginning of this rule, Cassinda took the advice of his religious practitioners. In 1585, for example, he sent his mother and many male and female Ngongos to protect his army. But his rule did not end happily. Years later, he was praised for strengthening Ndongo and prevailing against provincial rulers and members of rival lineages who had allied with the Portuguese. But Cassinda realized that his wars and his priests had failed to dislodge the Portuguese. Unable to accept the reality that the Portuguese conquest had left him with only a fraction of the kingdom he inherited, Cassinda abandoned fighting and retreated to Cabaça. For the last years of his life, he lived with the agony pretty much. Well, not really agony, but he just dealt with the fact that he couldn't expand his cities. And the Portuguese was pretty much just dominating. They had forts. They controlled most of the people in the land. They had previously been subjected to his power. Cassinda died in 1592. Remember, he's the grandfather of Nzinga. As Nzinga was approaching her 10th birthday, so, she's aware of what's going on now. She's 10 years old. She knows better. Her grandfather dies. She knows the Portuguese have taken over the kingdom. They no longer have the same kingdom that they had before as she knew as a child. But she spent most of her childhood on the run from the Portuguese, evading slave raidings, beheadings, and decapitations of their noses, or being transported and sent to the Americas. She escaped all of that. Although the son and grandson who followed him would continue the traditions of wars and resistance, it was his granddaughter, Nzinga, who would ultimately succeed in resisting the Portuguese. So Cassinda's son and grandson did the same thing that their grandfather did: resist the Portuguese. All of this was about resisting the Portuguese. They created complete turmoil in this area. However, if we don't have historical context, we don't know what a 10-year-old has bear witness to and continues to see during the reign of her father and brother. So we're going to end this episode today. And when we pick this thing back up, we will continue the conversation in providing historical context. And then we will get into all the other nuances that surround the conversation. See, before we actually can, properly digest what is going on during these times, we have to remove our 21st century mindset, and we have to think about what's going on in 1581. What's going on when Nzinga was born? What period was the state? I mean, what period was the country in? The coming of the Portuguese, the enslaving of Africans, the transatlantic slave trade, primed up and ready, infightings, usurpings, religious confusions, conversions, all of these things that are transpiring. She's learning about, as a 10-year-old, she's learning and knowing about people being decapitated in her presence as they flee. She learns to live her life on the run because they don't settle. It tells you he doesn't set, they don't settle somewhere. He doesn't go back to where he's from until late 1580s. And he dies in 1592. So I appreciate everybody again for tuning in. Like the show, share the show, tell a friend, tell a friend. I'll be back on in about 30 minutes to an hour on the Master Warrior Clan channel. I'm going to get into our kinship of the Askia. I'm going to deal with the Askias. And then I may be on Science with Sean YouTube channel. We're going to get into a little study group information that may transpire. Please like the show, share the show, tell a friend, tell a friend. We will continue to provide historical context about the life of the Queen and more. And absolutely, Kofi does have 3 videos on the Congo. He deals with the Congo specifically. He deals with Queen Nzinga specifically in the presentation. And he deals with some other people that wreck shop in those times. Go pick up your copy of What SARS-CoV-2 Taught Me. The link is in the description. Go pick up your copy of Spellmasters, our Volume 4 project. Come on, y'all, support our books. We work really hard on trying to compile information, bring it forth in advanced knowledge as our ancestors did. We are trying to restore Tep Hesep, correct method. We are trying to restore advancing knowledge because these are tools that we can use to move our households, our communities, and our people forward. We can do them in small groups, and everybody can be trained the right way to know how to disseminate certain things and solve problems. If we don't have the tools to solve problems, we will stay in disarray. We will continue to let some people in a barber chair and a barber carry a conversation about some things they don't know, haven't read, and are very unfamiliar with, and misdirect us. No more bubblegum scholarship. You go get you a pack of double bubble, open up one, and then it says some things in there, and then you be like, oh man, whatever. No. If we allow you to deteriorate the legacy of our queen, and I'm saying that from here, I'm saying that if we allow someone to do that, to demean that, then that means I'm telling you, like I said yesterday, Martin Luther King will be next. Malcolm X will be next. Other influential people who actually got off their ass and did something will be next. Again, the link to the books are in the description. Pick up your copy of What SARS-CoV-2 Taught Me today. Pick up your copy of Spellmasters today. Support the Kofi Pi Psi research team. Subscribe to the channel. Like the show. Share the show.